Dominic Moretti didn't believe in ghosts, but standing in the heart of his Chicago penthouse at 2 a.m, the scent of fresh blood still clinging faintly to the cufflink of his custom-tailored shirt, he seriously wondered if the trembling woman before him might be a spectral apparition. Elena Carter, the new housekeeper, pressed a single finger to her lips with a desperate, almost frantic urgency that belied her usually quiet demeanor. Don't let her hear you. In Dominic's precise, brutal world, people did not give him instructions. He was the architect of consequence. He gave the orders that determined which men lived and which died, the commands that maintained the delicate, bloody peace between Chicago's most dangerous families. Yet, something in the housekeeper's dark eyes, a horrific blend of raw terror mixed with unyielding determination, made him freeze instantly. What the hell is going on in my house? His voice was dangerously low, a lethal rumble usually reserved for meeting rooms or deserted docks. With a surprising surge of strength, Elena grabbed his forearm, pulling him forcefully toward the deep shadows pooling near the massive grand piano. If you go in there now, it'll only get worse for them. Them, his children. 7-year-old Lucas and 5-year-old Sophia were supposed to be safe, tucked into their silent, luxurious bedrooms. Dominic had spent the evening dealing with urgent business at the docks, the kind of messy business that guaranteed men ended up bleeding out onto the concrete. For once, he had come home early, carrying a crushing weight of paternal guilt heavier than the Beretta semi-automatic holstered against his ribs. From deeper inside the hushed expanse of the penthouse, he heard it. A child's voice, high and trembling, definitely not asleep, definitely not safe. Elena's hand clamped instantly over his mouth, cutting off his involuntary reaction. She'll hear you. Trust me. 60 seconds. No one, absolutely no one in his life called him Dominic. Not his hardened soldiers, not his wary business partners, not even Victoria, his fiancée, who exclusively used the sickly sweet moniker, Darling. But Elena spoke the name Dominic not as a command, but like a desperate, ancient prayer. They moved through the shadows of a home Dominic thought he knew intimately. As they silently approached the heavy oak door of the playroom, Elena positioned him tightly behind a marble column, effectively shielding him from view. Then, she slowly pointed through the slight gap in the doorway. Dominic saw his daughter first. Sophia, kneeling rigidly on the plush Persian rug, her small shoulders shaking violently. Beside her, Lucas stood ramrod straight, hands clasped tightly behind his back like a captured prisoner. Towering over them, pacing back and forth in razor-sharp designer heels, was Victoria Santoro, his fiancée, the polished, ice-cold daughter of the formidable Antonio Santoro. Their engagement was a political treaty, a ceasefire signed in the language of warring empires. You think crying will change anything, Sophia? Victoria's voice was a high-pitched slice of glass, effortlessly cutting through the air. Your father isn't here. He's never here, is he? And when he is, he's too weak to do what's necessary. Dominic's vision blurred, the edge of his perception turning a deep, dangerous red. Weak children become dead weight, Victoria continued, stopping her pacing to fix them with a cruel, calculating stare. In my family, we eliminate dead weight. Be grateful. I'm only teaching you discipline. She crouched down, forcing herself to Sophia's eye level. Now tell me what you are. Sophia's tiny voice was barely a whisper. Worthless. The word detonated in Dominic's chest, ripping through his hardened layers like an explosive charge. Dominic lunged forward, the killer's instinct that had sustained him for 15 years surging through his veins like molten, blinding fire. He intended to snap Victoria's perfect, fragile neck with his bare, bloodied hands. But Elena stopped him. She met his rush with a focused, unimaginable strength for a woman of such slender frame, pushing him forcefully against the cold wall, her entire body pressing taut against him to hold him immobile. Not yet, she whispered, her voice a sharp blade drawn across flesh. If you go in there now, she will twist everything around. You will become the villain. She will threaten to leave and take the Santoro alliance, and all the territory that comes with it, with her. You know this game. Dominic knew. He knew the complex, ruthless game all too well. The engagement to Victoria had never been about love or even affection. It was a carefully drafted peace treaty written in thick ink, sealed with blood and money. But his child, his own flesh and blood, was kneeling on that floor, forced to call herself worthless. Elena pulled a smartphone from her pocket, the screen glowing intensely bright in the surrounding darkness. "You need to see this before you do anything." She pressed play. A video appeared, filmed from a high angle, perhaps from a well-hidden camera nestled within the crystal chandelier. Dominic instantly recognized his own opulent living room, and he recognized Lucas, his son, being dragged by the hair across the flawless marble floor by Victoria. The boy made no sound. No crying, no screaming, only teeth clenched in silent, grim endurance, like a small, ancient warrior who had grown disturbingly familiar with pain. The next video showed Sophia seated miserably in the corner of the room, tears streaming down her plump, young cheeks. Victoria walked over, and without a single word of warning, her hand swung upward and struck the 5-year-old girl straight across the face. The slap echoed through the recording like the sharp crack of a whip. Sophia stumbled sideways but did not dare to cry out loud. Then Victoria's voice rang out, cold and laced with such cruelty it sent involuntary shivers down Dominic's spine. "Your mother was weak too. That is why she died." The screen went dark. Dominic realized his hands were trembling uncontrollably. Not from fear. He hadn't felt fear in a decade, but from the incandescent rage burning inside his chest, threatening to consume everything, including himself. His hand instinctively shot toward the Beretta holstered at his side, fingers gripping the cold, familiar handle in a reflex carved deep into his very bones. Elena placed her hand lightly on his arm, not to restrain the gun, but to refocus his attention. 12 recordings like this, she said, her voice steady and unervingly unwavering. 3 months I have been watching. She only does it when you are away. Only when you are at the docks, at those late-night meetings, at all the places where your empire needs you more than your children do. 3 months. Dominic's voice came out as a wounded, guttural growl. 3 months, 90 days, more than 2,000 hours. His children had endured a private hell while he naively believed they were safest right here, in their own home. Elena nodded slowly, her eyes showing not a trace of fear before the fury blazing within him. 3 months Victoria Santoro has been free to torment them while you built your empire. 3 months your children learned to stay silent just to survive. 3 months they waited for someone to save them. But no one came. Every word pierced through Dominic's chest like a freshly sharpened blade. He was Dominic Moretti. He kept the fragile peace among Chicago's most dangerous factions. He had ordered men killed without a moment's hesitation. Yet he had utterly failed to protect the 2 small, innocent lives entrusted to him. Why? He demanded, his voice strained and ragged. Why did you watch? Why did you record all of this? Who the hell are you? Elena looked at him, and in those deep, dark eyes, Dominic saw something far deeper than simple fear, something much stronger than mere determination. He saw purpose, a mission that had reached its critical point. "The one who has been waiting for you to come home early for the past 3 months," she answered, her gaze holding steady. "The one who will tell you the truth, but not now. Right now, you need to stay silent and observe, because what you just saw is only the tip of the iceberg." Before Dominic could unleash another demanding question, a sound cut sharply through the stillness of the dark penthouse. A phone rang from the playroom, its cheerful, jarring melody mocking the hellish scene unfolding before them. Elena tightened her grip on his arm, immediately pulling him deeper into the absolute darkness behind the protective pillar. Through the crack in the doorway, they watched Victoria pull a shimmering phone from her pocket, glance at the screen, then raise a long, elegant finger to her lips to silence the children one last time. She stepped away from them, moving toward the vast expanse of the window overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline. Her back was turned to Lucas and Sophia, and her voice dropped to a guarded whisper. But in the dead silent penthouse at 2 a.m., every syllable still found its way unerringly to Dominic's ears. 15 years in the underworld had trained him to catch vital confessions amid the deafening noise of crowded nightclubs and back alleys. Now, those same finely tuned ears were capturing every fragment of a conversation Victoria believed no one could hear. Tomorrow night, her voice was soft as a breath, yet clear and distinct as a bell chime. Dominic held his own breath, muscles locked. The documents are ready, Victoria continued, one hand smoothing her perfectly styled dark hair, while her eyes remained fixed on the endless city lights beyond the plate glass. Elena stood motionless beside him, but Dominic could feel the palpable tension radiating from her body like an electric current. He suspects nothing. A quiet, triumphant laugh escaped Victoria's ruby-red painted lips, the chilling sound of someone who held absolute victory firmly in her grasp. Then came the final sentence, the one that made the blood in Dominic's veins freeze solid, as if instantly doused with liquid nitrogen. The children will no longer be a problem. Problem. His children were designated as a problem. Lucas, 7 years old, with eyes already aged far beyond his years. Sophia, 5 years old, whose sweet, ringing laughter he could no longer recall the last time he'd heard. They were merely problems to be coldly solved in the estimation of the woman he was scheduled to marry. Victoria ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket with the casual grace of a predator who had just finished marking her vulnerable prey. She turned around, and as if flipping an invisible switch, a gentle, practiced smile bloomed on her lips. The same smile Dominic once foolishly believed was genuine love. The smile he now recognized was nothing more than a flawless mask hiding a venomous serpent. "Now then, time for bed," Victoria said to the children, her voice sickeningly sweet, dripping with false care. She approached Lucas and Sophia, the two children still standing motionless like statues carved from fear, their vacant eyes fixed on the floor. "And remember this." Victoria leaned down, placing one hand on each child's small shoulder, in a gesture that might have appeared affectionate to an outsider. But Dominic could clearly see how her fingers squeezed tight, her blood-red nails digging cruelly into the thin fabric of their pajamas. "If you say anything to your father, I will make sure you never see him again." Sophia trembled visibly but did not dare to move or make a sound. "There are schools very far away," Victoria continued, her voice still smooth and sweet, yet cold as glacier ice. "In places where even airplanes take 2 days to reach, where no one knows who you are, where you will be completely alone." She tilted her head slightly, the saccharine smile never wavering. "Do you understand?" Lucas nodded first, a mechanical, soulless motion, like a robot following its programming. Then Sophia, her eyes still wet with unshed tears, but no more tears falling, nodded after her older brother. "Good children." Victoria straightened up, deliberately brushing off her hands, as if she had just completed a mundane household chore. "Now go to your rooms." The two children walked away immediately, their small hands instinctively finding each other in the dim light, holding tight as if afraid the other would simply vanish if they let go. Dominic watched the small, retreating figures of his children disappear down the long hallway, and inside his chest, something shattered beyond any hope of repair. It wasn't his heart. His heart had hardened long ago in this dangerous world. It was his belief, the foundational belief that no matter who he was, no matter what dark deeds he committed, at least his children were absolutely safe in their own home. The children moved through the dark hallway, their small footsteps making almost no sound on the velvet carpet. They had tragically learned to move like ghosts in their own house. And when they passed the pillar where Dominic was hiding, his heart utterly stopped. Lucas turned his head. Perhaps it was pure instinct. Perhaps it was the heightened intuition of a child who had grown too accustomed to remaining alert to danger. But in that crucial moment, the eyes of the 7-year-old boy met the eyes of the father he had been waiting for through 3 endless, torturous months. Dominic saw everything in those eyes. He saw pain buried deep beneath a protective shell of silence. He saw fear that had become a constant, suffocating companion. He saw hope, but not the bright, vibrant hope of a normal child. This was exhausted hope. Hope that had been strangled and crushed too many times until it remained only a faint, flickering light at the very bottom of a deep, dark well. Dominic wanted desperately to step out, wanted to pull his son violently into his arms. wanted to scream out that Father is here now. Father will protect you. Father will never let anyone hurt you again. But before he could move a single muscle, Lucas did something that shattered Dominic's heart into a million irreparable pieces. The boy did not cry out, did not run to his father, did not weep or ask to be held. Instead, Lucas only gripped his sister's hand tighter, turned his face forward, and continued walking as if he had never seen anything at all. 7 years old. His son was only 7 years old, but the boy had already learned the most brutal lesson this world had to teach. Silence means survival. Reaction means danger. Hope is a luxury that cannot be afforded in this life. Lucas had seen his father, had recognized salvation standing just a few steps away. Yet he still chose to walk on into the darkness because he knew with chilling certainty that one sound, one wrong move, could make everything infinitely worse. His son had learned to trust no one, not even his own father. That look, that brief, excruciating moment when father and son's eyes met and then purposefully parted, broke something inside Dominic that no bullet, no blade, no torture session had ever reached. He had killed men. He had ordered mass executions. He had watched his enemies beg for mercy without blinking, but never, not once in his life had he felt pain like this cold, hollow agony. Sophia followed her brother, completely unaware that her father stood frozen in the shadows just steps away. She was too small, too tired, too completely accustomed to keeping her head down and simply walking on. The two small figures faded into the darkness at the end of the hallway, and Dominic stood there, his hand still gripping the gun handle without realizing it, his eyes still fixed on the empty space where his son had just looked at him. Elena touched his elbow gently, pulling his shattered attention back to reality. She checks the children's room at 3 in the morning. She whispered, her voice urgent but remarkably composed. Every night the same routine, to make absolutely sure they have not sneaked away to call anyone. We have 1 hour. Dominic swallowed hard, his throat dry and raw as if he had just swallowed sand. 1 hour to do what? Elena looked straight into his eyes, and in the dim, filtered light from the window, Dominic saw the absolute steel determination in the eyes of this mysterious housekeeper. To get them somewhere safe. To understand what those documents she mentioned are. To find out precisely why your children will no longer be a problem after tomorrow night. 1 hour. 60 minutes. 3,600 seconds to save the children he had failed to protect for 3 unforgivable months. Dominic looked toward the children's bedroom, where Lucas and Sophia lay in darkness, perhaps feigning sleep, perhaps silently praying for a miracle. "Lead the way," he said to Elena, his voice low and solid as an unbreakable vow. "I will not waste another second." Before Dominic could follow Elena, a scream tore violently through the night. Sophia's scream, high-pitched and utterly desperate. It echoed throughout the penthouse like a siren alarm. Dominic did not think, did not calculate, did not care whether Victoria heard the sound. He ran. The instinct of a father protecting his young blazed fiercer than any survival instinct he had possessed in his 15 years as the head of Chicago's underworld. His feet flew down the long hallway, his heart pounding in his chest as if it would burst through his ribs. And in his mind, there was only one deafening thought. His daughter. His daughter was screaming. He reached the children's bedroom in mere seconds, his shoulder slamming hard into the doorframe as he rushed in too fast. But when he got there, the screaming had stopped. In its place was something far more painful to hear. Muffled sobbing. Crying strangled into near silence. The terrible sound of a child who had learned to suffer without making a noise. In the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains, Dominic saw Lucas sitting on Sophia's bed. The 7-year-old boy was covering his sister's mouth with one small hand while his other arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders, as if trying to physically hold her together before she completely shattered. The boy was doing the work that adults should have done. Protecting his sister, keeping her quiet, shielding her from the inevitable wrath of the monster sleeping in the next room. When Lucas looked up and saw his father standing in the doorway, the boy's face crumpled. It didn't crumble from fear or pain, but crumbled between two opposing, crushing emotions. Relief and terror, hope and despair. He wanted to run to his father, but feared the catastrophic consequences. Wanted to cry, but feared the sound would carry. Wanted to be saved, but had grown accustomed to saving himself. Nightmare, Papa, Lucas said, his voice trembling uncontrollably, but still fiercely fighting for control. He removed his hand from his sister's mouth, his small fingers quickly wiping the fresh tears from Sophia's wet cheeks. She just had a nightmare. It is nothing. We are fine. 7 years old. His son was only 7 years old, yet he had already learned to use lies as an impenetrable shield. Had already learned to hide the brutal truth to protect himself and his sister. Had already learned that in this house, truth was a dangerous, unaffordable luxury. Dominic stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind him. He walked slowly to the bed, knelt down before his 2 children, and placed himself directly at their eye level. This was an action he had never performed before. In his world, people knelt before him, never the other way around. But tonight, in this dark, quiet room, he was willing to kneel before 2 small, fragile souls who had endured unimaginable hell because of his failure and absence. I know, he said, his voice so choked with emotion he barely recognized it as his own. I heard everything. He raised his large hands, touching Lucas's cheek first, then Sophia's, wiping away the tears still wet on their faces. And I swear on your mother's memory, she will never hurt you again. Never. Sophia looked up, her large, round eyes red from desperate crying, her lips still trembling slightly. Do you know about Miss Victoria? Her voice was tiny, wispy, as if afraid that speaking louder would make everything agonizingly real. You know, I know everything. My little princess, Dominic whispered, his throat tightening agonizingly with pain and regret. I am sorry I was not here. I am sorry I did not know sooner. Lucas remained utterly frozen, as if not yet daring to truly believe what was happening. Do you promise? The boy asked, his voice shaking violently. She said, if we told you, she would send us away to schools very far away, where you could never find us. A ferocious, white-hot rage ignited inside Dominic's chest, threatening to consume him whole, but he forced it down. Now was not the time for anger or violence. Now was the time for the gentleness these 2 children had been ruthlessly denied for far too long. Look at me, he said, his voice now solid as tempered steel. You are not broken. Do you hear me? You are not worthless. You are not a burden. You are my children, my flesh and blood, the only thing in this world that truly matters. He pulled both children into his arms, holding them tight, crushing them to his chest as if afraid someone would instantly tear them away from him. And no one, do you hear me? No one in this world can take you from me. You belong to me and no one takes what is mine. In his powerful arms, the 2 small bodies trembled uncontrollably. Then Lucas cried. For the first time in 3 months, the boy allowed himself to truly cry, crying that was not muffled, not suppressed, but a torrent of grief and terror finally released. Sophia cried along with him, sobs bursting forth like water breaking through a dam that had desperately held back the flood for too long. And Dominic held his children tight, making a silent promise to himself that even if he had to burn all of Chicago to the ground and face the entire world alone, he would keep this solemn vow. A knock on the bedroom door, soft as a breath of wind, interrupted their moment of painful reunion. Elena slipped into the room like a phantom, her face tense under the pale moonlight. The light in Victoria's bedroom just turned on, she said, her voice urgent but remarkably calm. She may have heard the scream. We need to move right now. Dominic stood up immediately, one hand still firmly on Lucas's shoulder, the other holding Sophia's tiny hand. Where to? He asked, the tactical leader instantly returning. Victoria controls every way in and out of this house. Security cameras, alarms. Not every way, Elena replied, a thin, almost predatory smile briefly crossing her lips. Follow me. They left the bedroom, moving swiftly and silently. Elena stopped abruptly before a large, ornate wooden panel at the dead end of the service hallway. a piece of decorative architecture that had always looked permanently affixed to the wall. "Impossible," Dominic whispered, his voice tense and disbelieving. "My security team swept this penthouse before I moved in. Thermal scanners, sonar. They checked every single inch. Your men were looking for heat signatures and electronic bugs." "Dominic," Elena replied, her fingers tracing the edge of the carved molding with intimate familiarity. "They weren't looking for empty space." She pressed a precise sequence of carved flowers on the wood panel. Not a modern button, but a mechanical latch hidden expertly within the intricate design. With a soft click, the wall didn't slide. It swung inward like the heavy steel door of a vault. "Prohibition era," she explained, her voice echoing slightly in the sudden, revealed space. "A smuggler's hideout, lined with lead and concrete, impervious to thermal scans, invisible to sonar." Dominic stared into the absolute darkness, the space feeling impossibly dense. "How?" he demanded, the question ripping itself free from his throat. "How did you possibly find it when my best security failed, when the systems I spent millions on were useless?" "I measured," Elena said simply, her voice devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact as she stepped into the void of the secret entrance. "The hallway is exactly 4 feet shorter on the inside than the blueprints say it should be on the outside. Mathematics doesn't lie." Dominic looked at her. He truly looked at her, studying the sharp angles of her face illuminated only by the faint light leaking from the penthouse. He didn't waste breath asking why a housekeeper would bother to measure the highly classified architectural dimensions of his fortified home. He was beginning to understand that Elena Carter was far more dangerous, far more perceptive, and far more brilliant than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. They moved through the narrow passage. The air was stale, the walls thick with years of accumulated dust, yet the floor beneath their feet was strangely clean and smooth, a clear sign that someone had been using this hidden path regularly, recently. Lucas gripped his father's hand so tightly his small knuckles were white. Sophia was cradled securely in Dominic's arms, her head resting against the solid anchor of his shoulder, as if she had finally found the one safe harbor in the world to allow herself rest. Elena stopped before an ancient door, its cheap paint blistering and peeling, its hinges fused with rust. But when she pushed it inward, the sight that lay inside made Dominic freeze absolutely in his tracks, every muscle locking rigid. This was not a forgotten storage room. This was a dedicated, high-tech surveillance center. 3 large, high-resolution computer monitors sat clustered on a functional metal desk, displaying crisp, live images from cameras strategically placed throughout the penthouse. He saw the living room, the dining room, the children's bright playroom, and even the master bedroom where Victoria now stood. Her posture was tense, unnatural, her eyes fixed sharply on the door, listening, waiting for a sound that might betray their presence. Beside the monitors, an open laptop glowed, dozens of digital file folders visible on the screen. Stacks of meticulously organized documents were arranged on wire shelves, each file carefully labeled with dates and times. And beneath a heavy, cheap sheet draped over a single chair in the corner of the room, Dominic instantly recognized the unmistakable, familiar outline of a Glock. "Insurance," Elena said, her voice dropping to a low, cold timbre as she secured the heavy steel door behind them. "Everything Victoria has done over the past 3 months. Every casual word, every calculated action, every cruel slap, and every chilling threat. All of it has been recorded right here." Dominic gently set Sophia down on the empty chair. The little girl was deep in sleep, overcome by pure exhaustion. Lucas stood immediately beside his sister, one protective hand resting lightly on her small shoulder, as if even in deep slumber, the boy never ceased his lonely watch. Dominic turned to Elena, his gaze entirely transformed. It was no longer the look of a master assessing a servant, but the focused, intense gaze of a man trying desperately to solve an incredibly complex, highly dangerous puzzle. "You are not a housekeeper," he stated, not asking a question, but affirming a sudden, terrifying truth. "Who are you really?" Elena did not respond immediately. She walked slowly toward the desk, her fingers lightly brushing over the stacks of files, the touch seeming to evoke painful, visceral memories. When she finally turned back to face him, there was an expression in her eyes that Dominic recognized instantly, because he lived with it every day: pain. The deep, transformative kind of pain that had been carefully distilled and sharpened into a reason for survival. "I am someone who made a promise to a woman who died," Elena replied, her voice sinking to a haunting whisper. "Someone who has been waiting for you to come home early for the past 3 months, waiting specifically for the precise moment you would be forced to see the absolute truth with your own eyes." Dominic's heart clenched violently in his chest. "My wife, Catherine," the name escaped him, a sound that was simultaneously a mournful prayer and a desperate curse. Catherine, the woman he had loved completely, the woman who had died tragically in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving him with 2 shattered children and a heart that felt perpetually broken. Elena shook her head slowly, but it was not a complete denial. "Not exactly," she corrected, and in her tone, Dominic detected a deep, simmering bitterness. "But your children are not the only ones Victoria Santoro has utterly destroyed. She took the most important person in my life, and I came here to make sure she pays for absolutely everything she took." Elena turned back to the glowing laptop, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced fluency of someone who had navigated this digital landscape hundreds of times before. A hidden folder opened, and on the screen, a photograph of a young woman appeared. Dominic stared at the face in the picture, a faint, unsettling feeling of familiarity creeping through his mind. The eyes in the photograph resembled Elena's, the same deep, intense dark brown. But there was something fundamentally different, softer, warmer. As if this woman looked at the world through the eyes of someone who still believed in inherent goodness, while Elena looked at the world through the jaded eyes of someone who had tragically lost that faith forever. "Rachel Carter," Elena articulated the name, her voice falling flat and heavy. "My sister. She worked as an accountant for you 3 years ago. The downtown office. She handled the books for your legitimate businesses." Memories crashed over him like a brutal, unexpected wave. Dominic remembered Rachel Carter now, the young woman with the consistently radiant smile and fingers that flew across the keyboard like a blur. She had worked for him for just over a year, never asking questions that shouldn't be asked, never showing curiosity about where the truly massive amounts of money originated. Perfect, discreet employee. Then one day, she simply stopped coming to the office. The news report said she was killed during a robbery gone wrong. Wrong place, wrong time. Dominic, always correct, had sent flowers to the funeral, a massive white wreath with words of polite condolence. He had even sent a substantial sum of money to her family as a required gesture of respect for a former employee. Then he continued with his life, continued with his work, continued the long process of forgetting. "I remember," Dominic said, his voice growing heavy with the weight of that forgotten obligation. "The robbery. I sent flowers." Elena turned back sharply, and in her eyes blazed a fire that Dominic instantly recognized as the most dangerous force in the world. It was the fire of pure hatred, of pain that had ripened into cold, lethal purpose. "It was not a robbery." Elena's voice was cold, sharp as steel that had been tempered in ice water. "The Santoro family killed my sister. Antonio Santoro gave the direct order. His men carried it out." She paused, swallowing hard, as if the next words were shards of glass violently cutting into her throat. "They tortured her first. For 2 days they wanted information about your operations, about your money flows, about weaknesses they could exploit in your empire." The small room seemed to shrink claustrophobically around them. The air grew so thick with unspoken horror that Dominic found it profoundly difficult to draw a breath. "She did not say a word," Elena continued, her voice trembling now, but still ringing with resolute pride. 2 days of unimaginable torture, and she never breathed a single syllable. Not because she was loyal to you, Dominic Moretti, but because she knew that if the Santoros got that information, they would immediately come for you. And if they came for you, they would inevitably find the 2 children. She died to protect Lucas and Sophia, 2 children she had never even met in her life. Dominic felt his knees literally weaken beneath him. A woman he had barely remembered, a footnote in his ruthless life, had endured hell and death itself to protect his children, while he, the father, had merely sent flowers and continued his comfortable process of forgetting. "You came here for revenge," he stated simply. It was not a question. Elena placed her hand gently on the screen, her finger lightly touching her sister's face in the photograph. "I came here to find the truth," she replied softly. "When I discovered who was truly behind my sister's death, I made a plan. I would infiltrate the life of Dominic Moretti, gather irrefutable evidence, and then I would utterly destroy him." She turned back, looking straight into Dominic's eyes without a trace of fear or hesitation. "I thought you were a monster. Thought you knew exactly how my sister died and simply chose to do nothing. Thought you deserved punishment just as much as the Santoros did." A heavy, absolute silence hung between them, suffocating the air. Dominic offered no defense, no denial. He simply waited. "But then I watched," Elena continued, her voice softening slightly, becoming weary. "3 months living in this house. I watched everything. I saw you looking at photographs of Catherine with a raw, visceral pain that could not possibly be faked. Saw you standing in her empty room for hours in the middle of the night, talking to someone who was no longer physically there. I saw your children waiting patiently by the window every single evening, their eyes fixed on the street below, hoping their father would finally come home early today. And I saw Victoria systematically, calculatingly destroying them while you drowned completely in guilt, utterly unaware of the hell unfolding under your own roof." She took a single, deliberate step closer to Dominic, standing only 1 step away from him now. "You are not a monster, Dominic Moretti. You are a broken man trying desperately to survive, just like me. So what do you want now?" Dominic asked, his voice low and strained. Elena glanced toward the chair where Lucas was still sitting, his hand still resting protectively on the shoulder of his sleeping sister. Her eyes softened visibly when she looked at the 2 children. And in that crucial moment, Dominic saw the real Elena. Not an avenger, not a spy, but a woman who had lost the person she loved most, and was determined to transform her debilitating pain into something profoundly meaningful. "I want Victoria to pay for everything she has done," Elena replied, her voice now solid and unshakable as a vow. "And I want to save the children my sister died to protect. That is the only thing left I can possibly do for Rachel." Elena turned back to the laptop, opening even more folders she had meticulously created over the past 3 months. Each file appeared on the screen like an individual, horrifying piece of a dark puzzle that Dominic had never remotely imagined. The first displayed screenshots of the search history on Victoria's personal computer. 6 weeks ago, his beautiful fiancée had typed keywords into the search bar that no one with good intentions would ever need. Poison that leaves no trace. Substances that cause natural heart failure. How to make death look like heart disease. Dozens of search results. Dozens of medical websites and dark, underground forums. All of them meticulously researched by Victoria, as if she were preparing for the most important exam of her life. Elena clicked to the next file. 4 weeks ago, a secretly taken photograph showed Victoria stepping out of a high-end estate lawyer's office in the Gold Coast district. Beside it was a copy of documents that Elena had somehow impossibly obtained. A new, amended will for Dominic Moretti, altered so that Victoria Santoro would become the sole heir in the event that he and his children tragically died. Dominic's signature was at the bottom of the page, perfect down to every single stroke. A forgery indistinguishable from the real thing. "She forged my signature," Dominic whispered, his voice catching painfully in his throat. "She has prepared everything," Elena replied, continuing immediately to open another file. 2 weeks ago, photographs taken at an upscale, discreet restaurant in the Chicago suburbs. Victoria sat across from 2 men that Dominic recognized instantly. Marco and Vincent, 2 notorious assassins of the Santoro family. Men that Antonio Santoro only ever summoned when specific problems needed to be solved permanently and quietly. In the photograph, Victoria was smiling brightly, raising a glass of wine as if celebrating a tremendous victory. Perhaps she was celebrating the upcoming deaths of him and his children. Then came the final file. Yesterday, A video feed from a discreet security camera that Elena had installed in Victoria's bedroom. The footage showed a delivery man arriving at the penthouse door, handing Victoria a small box wrapped plainly in brown paper. When Victoria opened the box inside the privacy of her room, the camera clearly recorded what was inside. A single vial of clear, unlabeled liquid, a set of medical syringes, and a small piece of paper with handwritten text that Victoria read carefully and then burned immediately in an ashtray. Digitalis, Elena explained, her voice clinical and cold, as if reading a scientific report. Extracted from the foxglove plant, used in medicine to treat specific heart conditions in highly controlled doses. But in the hands of someone with malicious intent, it becomes the perfect weapon. She paused, looking at Dominic with eyes heavy with profound significance. Small doses cause symptoms that perfectly resemble stress: fatigue, nausea, irregular heartbeat. Doctors would think it was from work pressure, from tension, from lack of sleep. Larger doses would cause sudden cardiac arrest, and by the time anyone suspected enough to request an autopsy, the poison would have completely degraded. No trace left behind. Dominic felt his stomach violently rising into his throat. He had faced death countless times in his life, had stared down the barrel of a gun without blinking, had ordered men killed without a moment of hesitation. But never, not once, had he felt this nauseated, this physically broken. "She was planning to kill us," he said, and the words came out like the weak, breathless whisper of a man who had just received his final death sentence. Elena nodded grimly. The children first. A tragic, seemingly accidental death would take the lives of Lucas and Sophia. Perhaps a bad fall down the grand staircase. Perhaps sudden food poisoning. Perhaps drowning quietly in the bathtub. Victoria would weep and grieve hysterically in front of everyone. And no one would ever suspect the heartbroken stepmother devastated by the loss of her beloved children. Her voice was bitter as pure venom. "Then you slowly." The stress of losing your children would be the perfect, plausible explanation for the unusual symptoms. Heart failure from excessive grief, the tragic death of a father who simply could not overcome the pain of loss. Perfect. Why? Dominic asked, though the horrifying answer was already forming clearly in his mind. What would she possibly gain from this elaborate betrayal? Elena closed the laptop with a decisive snap, turning to face him fully. "Everything. Your entire inherited fortune. The empire you built over 15 years of violence and shrewdness. The business relationships. The shipping routes, the legal and the illegal investments." She paused, letting each word sink into his consciousness like stone weights. "And her father, Antonio Santoro, would absorb your entire empire without firing a single shot. No war, no bloodshed, just a quiet funeral and a neatly forged will." Dominic looked toward his two children, sitting innocently in the corner of the room. Lucas was still awake, his eyes wide open in the deep darkness, listening intently to everything, though he surely did not understand the true scale of the horror being discussed. Sophia had fallen asleep with her head nestled on her brother's shoulder, utterly carefree in the deep sleep of childhood. These two small souls, his flesh and blood, had been marked for a slow, agonizing death by the woman he was weeks away from marrying. When he asked, his voice dropping low, like the contained growl of a predator, when was she planning to strike? Elena glanced quickly at the clock fixed on the wall. "Tomorrow night. The documents are finalized. The children will no longer be a problem. You heard that call. We have less than 24 hours to disappear." Dominic stood stock-still in the center of the secret room. The pale, cold blue light radiating from the computer screens cast strange, shifting shadows across his face. His eyes were fixed on the corner where Lucas sat, his small back braced against the wall. Sophia's head rested innocently on his shoulder. Both had finally fallen asleep from sheer, physical exhaustion. Their young faces were finally relaxed in slumber after hours of crushing tension. In their dreams, perhaps they did not have to be afraid. In their dreams, perhaps they were still normal children with a normal, safe life. Dominic knew he had only two impossible choices. The first choice was war. Call his men, mobilize his forces immediately, and confront the Santoro family head-on. He had enough firepower, enough loyal soldiers, enough deep-seated connections to turn Chicago into a blazing, violent battlefield. But war meant blood, meant death, meant stray bullets and explosions that did not bother to distinguish between powerful adults and innocent children. And his children, the two small figures sleeping right there, would be caught directly in the bloody middle of that war. The second choice was to run, to leave Chicago behind forever, to abandon the empire he had built over 15 years with sweat, tears, and blood, to abandon the identity of Dominic Moretti, the name that made powerful men tremble, the name that carried immense power and respect, to become nobody, a phantom vanishing completely into the night. Elena watched him in silence, allowing him the space to wrestle with the devastating thoughts tearing through his head. Then she spoke, her voice gentle, yet profoundly certain. "I have already prepared everything," she said. "A car is waiting now in the abandoned parking garage on level 3. Enough cash to live comfortably for several years. False identities for all four of us and a safe house that no one, not even the Santoros, can ever find." Dominic turned to look at her fully, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "You planned an escape for me. Since when?" "I planned for every possibility," Elena replied, entirely unflinching under his scrutinizing gaze, "including the possibility that you are fundamentally a good father trapped in a truly bad world, just as my sister believed." She paused, her eyes softening as she looked toward the two sleeping children. "Rachel told me about you, about how you called your children every single night, no matter where you were, about the family photograph you always kept prominently on your desk. She believed you did not belong in this life, and I prepared for the chance that she was right." Dominic looked down slowly at his own hands. The Beretta still rested there, its heavy, cold handle familiar as a part of his own body. This weapon had solved every single one of his problems for the past 15 years. An enemy wanted him dead? The Beretta solved it. A partner planned to betray him? The Beretta solved it. Someone threatened what belonged to him? The Beretta always had the definitive answer. It was the only language he knew how to speak in this world. The language of violence, the language of absolute power. Then he looked at Lucas and Sophia. Two small figures curled into each other in sleep, seeking warmth and safety from one another because they could not find it from the adults who were supposed to provide it. Lucas's closed eyes still showed faint traces of sleepless nights. Sophia's cheeks still bore the faint streaks of dried tears. These two children were all that remained of Catherine, were all that truly mattered in this entire terrible world. "If I run," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, "I lose everything. The empire, the power, everything I have built." Elena stepped closer, standing directly in front of him now. "If you stay," she replied, her voice unwavering for a single instant, "you lose them. Two choices. One decision." And Dominic Moretti, the man who had never once hesitated before any life or death choice, for the first time in his dangerous life, felt his hands trembling uncontrollably. He looked at the Beretta one last time. The cold weapon gleamed sharply under the screen's faint light, like a final, harsh reminder of the man he had been, of what he had done, of the blood on his hands that would never wash clean. Then Dominic did something he had never done in 15 years. He removed the gun from his body and deliberately placed it on the metal table with a soft, final sound. Metal touching wood, power touching complete surrender. He pulled his hand back, leaving the Beretta lying there like a heavy, cold piece of the past he was finally abandoning. "We go," he said, his voice now solid as steel once more. "Right now." The clock on the wall ticked rapidly. 3:47 in the morning. Each second felt like a heavy countdown to the end of the world he knew. Elena woke the children gently, using soft whispers to pull them from their brief, deep sleep. Sophia took a few seconds longer, her small eyes opening with confusion before she recognized her father standing reassuringly beside her. "We have to go now," Dominic said to the children, his voice gentle but unable to fully hide the urgent necessity in the moment. "No making any noise. Do everything Miss Elena tells you. Understand?" Lucas nodded immediately without a word of protest. Sophia only looked up at her father and reached her small arms up to be carried. Dominic lifted her, his arms holding her small body tightly, fiercely against his chest. Sophia wrapped her arms around his neck, her head resting on his shoulder as if it truly were the safest place in the world, and Dominic swore silently that he would make that true, no matter the cost. Elena led the way through the winding secret corridor, her footsteps making absolutely no sound. Lucas held her hand tightly, his small fingers wrapped securely around the hand of the woman he had only known as the housekeeper just hours before. They moved through narrow passages and down steep, hidden spiral staircases that Dominic had never known existed, descending deep into the foundations of the building until they reached a heavy steel door. Elena quickly entered a complex code on the keypad. The door hissed and opened with a soft click, and they stepped into an abandoned, vast parking garage that Dominic had no idea existed directly beneath his feet. The car waiting in the furthest corner of the garage was not Dominic's gleaming black Maserati, not the Bentley or the Range Rover he usually drove. It was an old, unremarkable Honda Civic. The silver paint was faded and dull. A few unsightly dents marred the front bumper, the kind of car people see hundreds of times a day and never, ever remember. The perfect car for disappearing entirely. Elena slid into the driver's seat. Dominic placed Sophia carefully in the back seat, then sat immediately beside his daughter. Lucas climbed in on the other side, instantly pressing close to his sister. The engine started with a soft, quiet hum, and the car rolled slowly out of the garage through a hidden exit that Dominic had never known existed. They drove through Chicago in the dead of night. Familiar streets drifted silently past the windows. Buildings that Dominic owned, restaurants where he had once negotiated million-dollar deals, street corners where he had ruthlessly built his empire from nothing. The flickering city lights receded rapidly in the rearview mirror, and with each mile they traveled, the past receded further and further away. Dominic Moretti was dying, not by a bullet or a blade but by definitive choice. He was burying with his own hands the legacy and the life he had built. Hands the man he had been for 15 years. 30 minutes after they left the penthouse, the phone in Dominic's pocket vibrated, shattering the tense silence of the car interior. He pulled it out, the screen glowing with a harsh, invasive light in the surrounding darkness. A familiar name, Victoria. He looked at that name, an instant knot of dread tightening in his stomach, and held the device for several agonizing seconds. He thought of her smile, that perfect, manufactured curve of her lips. He thought of the sweet, deceptive words she had once spun. And then he thought of the stark, unforgivable image of how she had forced his daughter to kneel and call herself worthless. The brief flash of nostalgia vanished, replaced by a cold, hateful clarity. He pressed decline, powered off the phone completely, removed the tiny plastic SIM card, and with a swift, decisive motion, threw it through the half-lowered window. The small square of plastic vanished into the high-speed night, a final, deliberate cutting of the last thread connecting him to the monstrous lie of his old life. They were already accelerating onto the interstate heading north when Elena glanced into the rear-view mirror, her eyes sharpening instantly, the calm facade she wore cracking just slightly. "We have a tail," she said, her voice strangely calm, utterly devoid of panic. Dominic turned to look behind them. 2 massive black SUVs were following, their high beams blazing aggressively in the night, the distance between them shrinking too quickly for coincidence. He recognized the type. The black Escalades that Santoro's men favored, he confirmed, the knowledge coming from deep muscle memory experience. "How did they find us so fast?" Dominic asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his hip where the custom Beretta usually sat. Then remembering the heavy weapon was sitting uselessly back in the secret room safe, abandoned with his former identity. "Victoria certainly put trackers in your car, in your phone, possibly even stitched into your clothes," Elena replied, her eyes never leaving the reflective surface of the rear-view mirror. "But they are tracking the devices, not tracking us. They did not expect us to switch cars in the middle of the night." Elena pressed the accelerator to the floor, and the aging Honda Civic, a vehicle chosen specifically for its anonymity, roared as if being violently awakened from a decade-long sleep. She wrenched the wheel hard to the right, plunging them off the highway and into a narrow, unlit road sandwiched between two immense, shadowy warehouse buildings. Another left turn, another right, she muttered, navigating the labyrinthine back streets with surgical precision. She drove like someone who had meticulously studied every road, every alley, every shortcut in the city, like someone who had trained relentlessly for this exact, high-stakes moment. In the back seat, Lucas held his sister tight, his small body tensed and rigid, instinctively shielding Sophia like a tiny human bulwark. He did not cry, did not scream, only held her firmly and squeezed his eyes shut, his lips moving silently in what might have been a desperate, whispered prayer. Sophia covered her ears with her tiny hands, eyes squeezed shut until speckles of light danced behind her lids, desperately trying to block out the terrifying roar of the outside world. Elena suddenly hit the brakes, turned sharply into the sloping entrance of a subterranean parking lot beneath a deserted office building, killed the lights, and stopped the car deep in the suffocating darkness. Seconds later, the two SUVs roared past the entrance above, their headlights sweeping across the concrete, but failing to detect the small, gray Civic hiding motionless in the inky shadows. The sound of their powerful engines faded, growing distant, and then vanished entirely. They waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. No one dared speak. The only sounds were the labored breathing of 4 exhausted people in the cramped space of the car and the loud, terrifying rhythm of hearts pounding hard enough to burst from their chests. Then Elena restarted the car, drove slowly out of the parking lot, and headed north, toward Wisconsin, toward freedom. Dominic looked out the passenger window as Chicago slowly, inexorably disappeared behind them. His empire, his immense power, the formidable man he once was, all of it receding with every mile. And he did not look back once. 5:30 in the morning. The eastern sky began to shift from absolute black to a bruised, weary gray, weakly heralding the arrival of a new, uncertain day. Elena stopped the car in front of a small, anonymous house in the suburbs of Milwaukee. It was a single-story home with an old, chipped tile roof and a lawn that was desperately overdue for mowing. Unremarkable to the point of being utterly invisible. That was exactly what they needed. The house sat among dozens of identical, forgettable homes on a quiet street, the kind of neighborhood where neighbors left for work early in the morning and returned late, where absolutely no one paid attention to who lived next door. Elena led them inside through the back door. The key was hidden exactly where it should be, under a withered flower pot, waiting as if it had been placed there months ago for this precise moment. Inside the house, Dominic looked around the sparsely furnished space and understood with a painful clarity that Elena had been preparing for this escape for weeks, perhaps even months. The refrigerator was stocked full of fresh food, every item recently purchased based on the distant expiration dates. The small closet held clothes in sizes for both adults and children, still folded neatly. On a small writing desk lay a stack of documents, new identification papers, meticulously forged birth certificates, and a basic laptop already set up and connected to a burner hotspot. She had planned for everything, even the highly unlikely possibility that he was not the monster she had initially imagined him to be. The children stood numbly in the middle of the living room, their eyes wide but strangely empty with deep exhaustion. They had been awake all night, had fled through dark, echoing corridors, had heard the terrifying roar of engines during the high-speed chase. Their small bodies were screaming for rest, but the trauma and the fear were still too great, too immediate, to allow sleep to come. Sophia stood clinging desperately to her father's leg, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Dominic's pants with painful intensity, as if afraid he would simply dematerialize if she let go. She looked up at him, her large round eyes still red and swollen from crying, her lips trembling uncontrollably as she asked a question that Dominic knew would haunt him until the day he died. "Will Miss Victoria find us?" Dominic knelt down immediately, placing himself at eye level with his daughter. He saw the profound, crippling fear in those innocent eyes. The fear of a 5-year-old child who had learned the hard way that monsters did not hide under the bed, but lived right inside the house, wearing pretty designer dresses and impossibly high heels. "No one will find us here," he said in the gentlest voice he could possibly manage, forcing a quiet strength into the words. "I promise we are safe now." Sophia looked at him, and in her eyes Dominic saw the same raw question Lucas had asked him the night before. The same inherent doubt, the same paralyzing fear of trusting and being betrayed again. "You promise?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper, as if needing to hear the word repeated once more just to make it real. "I promise." Dominic pulled her into his arms and held her tight, burying his face in her hair. "I will not let anyone hurt you anymore. No one." He led the children to a small bedroom at the end of the hallway where 2 single beds had been meticulously prepared with clean, white sheets and soft pillows. Lucas and Sophia lay down instantly, but their eyes remained open, staring fixedly at the ceiling as if waiting for the next terrible thing to happen. Dominic sat down heavily beside the bed, his hand gently stroking Sophia's hair. And then, from somewhere he could not name, an old, almost forgotten melody returned to his memory. It was the simple, comforting song that Catherine used to sing to the children every single night. A song he thought he had buried long ago, entombed with the pain of losing his wife. But tonight, in this strange, temporary safe house, the words found their way back. He began to sing softly, his deep voice rough and not nearly as smooth as Catherine's had been. But the melody was right, carrying an undeniable comfort. Sophia closed her eyes almost immediately, as if the lullaby were the forgotten key that unlocked the door to sleep, a place she had been forbidden to enter for far too long. Lucas relaxed as well, his shoulders visibly lowering, his small, clenched fists slowly uncurling beneath the sheets. When Dominic thought both children had finally sunken into a deep, restorative sleep, Lucas suddenly spoke, his voice small and fragile as a breath in the surrounding darkness. "Papa." The boy opened his eyes, looking up at his father with raw, guilt-filled eyes. "I am sorry. I am sorry I didn't tell you about Miss Victoria. I was scared. I thought if I told you, she would send us away and you would never find us again. I am so sorry." Dominic felt his heart seize in his chest. His son, 7 years old, was apologizing for not being able to save himself, carrying the immense and unfair guilt for what the adults in his life had failed to do. "You have nothing to apologize for," Dominic said, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to steady it. He took his son's small, clammy hand and held it tight. "Listen to me. Nothing in this situation is your fault. Nothing." He paused, swallowing down the sharp, acidic pain rising in his throat. "I am the one who should apologize. I was not here. I did not see what was happening. I left you alone with her. That is my fault. Only mine." Lucas looked at his father for several long seconds, absorbing the truth in his voice, then nodded softly, the tension finally leaving his young face. And for the first time in many months, the boy allowed himself to close his eyes without fear. When both children had fully surrendered to sleep, Dominic remained sitting there, a silent guardian, watching them in the faint light of dawn filtering weakly through the curtains. These 2 small, resilient souls had endured a quiet hell in silence, had learned to survive by trusting no one, and had carried invisible scars that might never fully heal. And he, their father, the supposed protector, had known nothing. Night eventually fell over Milwaukee in a silent, deep blanket. The small house sank into the darkness, broken only by the weak, yellow light spilling from the kitchen, where Dominic and Elena sat facing each other at the old wooden table. 2 cups of coffee had long gone stone cold between them, neither bothering to take another sip. The children were sleeping soundly in the next room, the first true sleep in many months, one not haunted by the looming ghost of Victoria. The silence stretched on, but it was not heavy or awkward. It was the silence of people who had grown tired of unnecessary words, who had been through too much in a single night to have the residual strength for small talk. Dominic looked down at his cooling coffee cup, his fingers unconsciously spinning it slowly on the laminate tabletop. Elena sat across from him, her eyes gazing out the window where the night was pitch black and starless. She believed in people. Elena suddenly spoke, her voice soft, almost a breath in the quiet night. Rachel. Even while working in your world, she still saw light in the darkness. She told me about you, about how you treated your employees, about how you talked to your children on the phone every night, always putting them first. Elena paused, her gaze still fixed on somewhere far beyond the window pane. She said you were not like the others in that world. You had something they did not have. Dominic looked up, his tired eyes meeting Elena's steady gaze. What? A faint, complex smile crossed Elena's lips. A sad smile, mixed with a deep, lingering nostalgia. She called it a crack. She said, people like you, people who have lived in darkness for too long, they usually become hard as stone. But you had a crack where light could still get in, where your true self was still alive, still fighting. She turned to look directly at Dominic. I didn't believe her then. I thought she was dangerously naive. But tonight, when I saw you kneel before your children, when I heard you sing them that lullaby, I understood exactly what she meant. Dominic said nothing for a long while. He thought about Rachel, the young woman with the gentle, innocent smile whom he barely remembered now. She had died protecting his children, and he had not even known her sacrifice until tonight. Catherine saw it, too. He finally spoke, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. She saw that crack, and she tried desperately to pull me out of the darkness. Every single day. He paused, memories of his wife rushing back like a relentless tidal wave. She wanted me out of this life, to leave Chicago behind, to leave everything I had built. We had a plan. Sell everything. Move to Montana. Buy a small ranch somewhere. No one knew what the name, Dominic Moretti, already meant. Live normally, raise the children, grow old together. Elena looked at him, waiting patiently. What happened? She asked gently. Dominic closed his eyes, the old, festering pain rising as if it had never faded. She died before I could follow through. Car accident. At least that is what I thought until now. He opened his eyes, looking down at his hands. Hands that had done so many terrible, necessary things. And I sank deeper instead of climbing out. I thought if I built an empire large enough, strong enough, I could protect my children with sheer power. I thought power was the only way to keep them safe. A bitter, self-mocking laugh escaped his throat. But while I was building my empire, I abandoned the very people I wanted to protect. Silence returned, but this time it carried the enormous, crushing weight of the words just spoken. Two people sitting in the small kitchen of a safe house. Two souls utterly shattered by different losses, yet sharing the same profound pain. Elena had lost her sister. Dominic had lost his wife. Both were trying to find some semblance of meaning in the tragedy, trying to turn grief into something not entirely meaningless. No one said another word. There was no need. In the darkness of the small kitchen with the cold coffee sitting between them, Dominic and Elena simply sat. No need to fill the emptiness with hollow words of comfort. No need to pretend that everything would magically be all right. Then their eyes met. Not a look of passion or desire. Not the desperate gaze of two people seeking comfort in each other's arms. This was a look of profound understanding. Two people who had touched the absolute bottom of pain and realized, suddenly, that they were not alone in the freefall. Elena saw in Dominic's eyes the crushing, existential guilt of a father who had failed. Dominic saw in Elena's eyes the profound loneliness of a sister who had lost half of her soul. There was no kiss, no hands touching, only two gazes meeting and holding in the darkness, understanding. Understanding the pain, understanding the loss, understanding why they were here, together, in this small house on a cold Milwaukee night. And sometimes that depth of understanding is more intimate than any physical touch. The next morning, the weak Milwaukee sunlight filtered through the thin, inexpensive curtains, waking Dominic from his fitful, uncomfortable sleep on the old sofa. He had not dared to sleep in a proper bed, had not dared to move more than a few steps from the children's door. His body ached from sleeping upright, every muscle screaming in protest, but it was a pain he was absolutely willing to endure. Elena had been awake since much earlier, already preparing breakfast in the kitchen with gentle, economical movements so as not to wake the deeply sleeping children. Dominic stood up, stretching his stiff muscles, and faced a hard truth he had been avoiding all night. He could not fight alone, and he certainly could not run forever. Victoria and Antonio Santoro had limitless resources, had armies of people, and possessed the concentrated power of an entire criminal empire. Sooner or later, they would find him. And when that happened, no safe house, no matter how anonymous, could possibly protect Lucas and Sofia. He needed help. From someone who could stand against the Santoros without being instantly crushed. From someone he trusted who operated in the legitimate world. Dominic picked up the burner phone Elena had prepared and dialed a number he had memorized 20 years ago. A number that sat dormant in the back of his mind. The direct line from Marcus Webb. They had grown up together on the south side of Chicago. Two poor kids dreaming of escaping the dirty streets. Then life took them in two radically different directions. Dominic chose the darkness, building an empire from blood and money. Marcus chose the light, becoming a high-ranking FBI agent who spent his life hunting people exactly like Dominic. But between them remained a strange, unbreakable thread, a childhood friendship that neither side could completely sever. They did not speak often, but when needed, they both knew the other would answer. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up, the receiver crackling. Dominic Moretti calling me at 7 in the morning. Marcus's voice came through, rough from just waking but still instantly sharp. Is someone dead or about to die? My children, Dominic replied, his voice heavy, starkly serious. If I do not act now, they will be. Silence settled on the other end of the line, thick and immediate. Then came the sound of Marcus sighing, the weary sound of a man weighing death and consequences. Tell me everything. And Dominic told him everything. From the moment he came home early last night, catching the horrifying scene of Victoria making Sofia kneel and call herself worthless. From the video recordings Elena had made to the chilling phone call about documents that implied the children will no longer be a problem. From the plan to poison them with digitalis to the ugly truth about Rachel Carter's death. He told it all without hiding, without justifying, without trying to make himself look better than the reality. He spoke like a man standing at the edge of an abyss with nothing left to lose but his integrity. Marcus listened without interrupting, only the faint sound of distant traffic coming through the line. That was something Dominic had always respected about his friend. Marcus knew when to stay silent and when to speak. When Dominic finished, silence stretched for several seconds. Then Marcus spoke, his voice low and serious. The FBI has been watching Santoro for 5 years, Dominic. Antonio Santoro is at the very top of our target list. But the old man is careful. He leaves no traceable paper trail. We know what he does, but we do not have evidence strong enough to withstand a court challenge. Marcus paused significantly. We need evidence. I have evidence, Dominic replied immediately, his voice energized by the possibility. Video of Victoria abusing my children. Documents about the poisoning plan. Search history. Call recordings. Photos of her meeting with Santoro's assassins. Enough to bury the entire family, not just her. How did you obtain these things? Marcus asked, his voice instantly cautious, the agent suddenly replacing the friend. Elena Carter, Rachel Carter's sister. She has been watching Victoria for 3 months, collecting everything. Dominic knew exactly what the next question would be, and preempted it. And before you ask, I did not know she was doing it until last night. Marcus sighed again, the heavy breath of someone forced to weigh immensely difficult choices. You know what this means, right, Dominic? If you want the FBI to act, you will have to testify before a federal grand jury. Against Santoro. He paused, letting each word sink in with its full weight. And against yourself. I know you will lose everything. The empire you built over 15 years. The identity of Dominic Moretti. Your old life. All of it will disappear. You will become nobody. Dominic looked toward the bedroom door where Lucas and Sofia were still sleeping. 2 children who had endured hell because of his absence. 2 children he had sworn to protect at any cost. I already lost everything that mattered once. Marcus, he said, his voice low but completely unwavering. When Catherine died, I thought that was rock bottom, but I was wrong. Rock bottom is when my daughter kneels down and calls herself worthless. Rock bottom is when my son sees his father but does not dare run to him because he has learned to be afraid. He drew a deep, shuddering breath. I will not lose again, no matter what it costs. Silence stretched on the other end. Then Marcus spoke, his voice softening slightly, returning to that of the old friend. I will be in Milwaukee this afternoon. And Dominic, do not go anywhere. Marcus Webb arrived at the safe house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, exactly as promised. He drove a generic gray sedan with nothing distinctive about it, the kind of deliberately boring car federal agents use when they do not want to be noticed. Dominic stood behind the curtain, watching his friend step out of the car, a black leather briefcase firmly in hand, his sharp eyes quickly scanning the quiet street before approaching the front door. Marcus Webb was 40 years old, but the constant stress of the job had turned his hair gray years earlier. He was slightly taller than Dominic, lean but deceptively solid, with eyes trained over 2 decades to see through every layer of deceit. 20 years in the FBI had transformed him from a poor kid on the South Side into one of the Bureau's best agents. Dominic opened the door for his friend to enter. The two men looked at each other for a long moment, the vast distance of too many years and too many different paths lying unspoken between them. Then Marcus simply nodded once, professionally, and stepped inside. Where are the children? He asked immediately, his eyes scanning the small, unfamiliar room. In the bedroom watching cartoons. Elena is with them. Marcus set his briefcase on the kitchen table, opened it, and carefully took out a government-issue laptop and a thick stack of documents. I have given a preliminary report to my superiors. They are very interested in what you have on Santoro. He sat down, opened the laptop, and began setting up a secure connection. But Dominic, you need to understand clearly what is about to happen now. Elena stepped out from the bedroom, closing the door gently behind her, and sat down quietly beside Dominic, waiting in silence. Marcus looked at both of them, then began to explain the strategy. This is the deal, Marcus said, leaning forward, his expression grave and utterly serious. Elena's evidence is a gold mine, but it's complex. We need 48 hours to verify the data, link it directly to Santoro's organization, and secure federal warrants for a RICO indictment. We are planning a synchronized raid on Friday night. Dominic narrowed his eyes, anticipating the catch. And us? You stay put, Marcus replied firmly, leaving no room for argument. If I pull you into federal custody today, Santoro's moles inside the Bureau will tip him off immediately. He'll shred the documents and vanish before we can execute the warrants. We need him to think you are still running, still scared, still hiding in the wind. You want us to be bait, Dominic said, his voice cold and hard. I want you to be ghosts, Marcus corrected. We will keep a loose perimeter, low profile. Friday night, the moment we have Santoro in handcuffs, a tactical team extracts you and the children. But until that clock hits 0, you don't move. You don't breathe. Marcus glanced briefly at Elena. Along with that, there is immunity from prosecution for Miss Carter regarding any actions related to gathering this evidence. Dominic turned to look at Elena, then back at Marcus. Elena will be protected. Marcus was silent for a moment, his eyes drifting back to the woman sitting beside Dominic. She never asked for protection for herself, he replied, his voice carrying something that sounded like reluctant respect. When I contacted her to verify information about her, the only thing she requested was assurance that the evidence would be used to bring Victoria Santoro to justice. Dominic turned to Elena, his eyes searching, not just for answers on her face, but for a reflection of the commitment he already felt. You will come with us, he said. Not a question designed to invite negotiation, but a quiet, absolute statement of necessity. Elena shook her head slightly, the movement conveying a weariness beyond her years. That was not my plan, Dominic. My plan was simple, to ensure Victoria pays for what she did to my sister, and what she did to your children. When that is done, my mission ends. What is your plan after that? Dominic asked, his voice low, carrying a slight, sharp edge of disbelief. Disappear after Victoria is arrested? Return to your old life as if the past 3 months of shared danger and intimacy never happened? Live alone with your sister's ghost for the rest of your life? Elena did not answer immediately. She looked down at the table, avoiding his intense gaze. Her fingers intertwined, gripping each other tightly beneath the wood, and Dominic could see the deep, paralyzing hesitation that she tried so hard to mask. This was a woman who had spent 3 months watching, planning, gathering evidence, meticulously waiting for the precise moment of retribution. She had planned for every contingency of the operation, everything, except where she herself would go when the silence finally fell. Before anyone could break the strained quiet with another word, the bedroom door opened. Lucas stood in the doorway, his large, round eyes looking at the adults with a profound worry that was too mature for a 7-year-old. The boy had heard. Dominic realized it instantly. Not everything, perhaps, but enough to grasp the crucial, frightening essence of the conversation. "Miss Elena will not come with us?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling slightly, betraying the fear beneath his careful composure. Sophia appeared right behind her brother, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy as if she had been quietly crying for some time. Without a single sound, she ran straight to Elena, her tiny arms wrapping themselves tightly around the woman's legs, clinging desperately as if afraid Elena would physically dissolve into thin air. "I do not want you to go," Sophia said, her voice choked and muffled against Elena's dress. "You are a good person. You saved us. You have to stay with us." Elena stood motionless, paralyzed by the weight of the small body pressing against her. Her eyes looked down at the child clinging to her legs, the same child who, less than 2 days ago, had knelt on the carpet and called herself worthless. The child her sister had died trying to protect. Now that child was holding her, treating her as if she were family, as if her departure would represent a loss too immense to endure. Lucas stepped closer, standing solemnly beside his sister. "Miss Elena stayed with us when Miss Victoria did those terrible things," the boy said, his voice steadier and more resolute than any 7-year-old should have been. "You did not leave then. Why do you want to leave now?" Elena slowly knelt down, resting one hand on Lucas's shoulder, the other gently stroking Sophia's hair. She looked into the faces of the 2 children, the children she had secretly protected, watched over, and shielded for 3 agonizing months, and Dominic saw something fundamentally change in her eyes. The formidable wall she had erected around her heart was visibly beginning to crack. She began, then stopped, unable to find the words. She looked up at Dominic, a quick, helpless glance at Marcus, then looked back at the 2 small faces waiting expectantly for an answer, as if their very lives depended on her response. "I will think about it." It was not a promise, but it was definitively not a refusal. And in that moment, Dominic knew that whether Elena admitted it or not, she had long ceased to be an outsider in this tragic, desperate story. 48 hours. The time passed, measured not in minutes on a clock, but in violent, thudding heartbeats. It was a silent, agonizing countdown. Marcus had imposed total radio silence to prevent interception of their location or plans. Inside the small house, the air was heavy and thick with the tension of a bomb waiting to detonate. They were not merely waiting for a new life to begin. They were waiting for the hammer to fall on the Santoro Empire, praying with every fiber of their being that the enemy would not find them before the FBI strike team did. Slowly, tentatively, the children began to laugh more often, their small smiles tentative returns to the surface of life. They began to sleep without nightmares every single night. Elena still had not given an official answer, but significantly, she no longer mentioned leaving. And Dominic, for the first time in many years, felt a small, fragile, overwhelming feeling that resembled hope. But a storm was forming in Chicago. Victoria Santoro stood in the middle of the penthouse that had once belonged to Dominic, a space now transformed into a battlefield of shattered furniture and broken glass. She had just violently smashed an antique vase estimated to be worth $100,000. The sound of glass breaking echoed loudly, a frantic counterpoint to the silent screams tearing through her mind. The perfect face that had once captivated Dominic, the flawlessly sculpted mask she usually wore, was now twisted and unrecognizable with blinding rage, her manic eyes sweeping across the ruined room, desperately searching for something else to destroy. He disappeared, Victoria shrieked, grabbing a heavy table lamp and hurling it straight at a mirrored wall. 2 days. 2 days, and none of you incompetent fools can find him. Antonio Santoro stood impassively in the far corner of the room, silently watching his daughter's horrifying display with eyes cold and lifeless as shards of ice. He was 62 years old, his stark white hair slicked back perfectly, his weathered, ancient face revealing not a single traceable trace of emotion. This was the man who had forged the Santoro Empire from nothing but brutal ambition, the man who had ordered dozens of men killed without blinking an eye, the man who had arranged Catherine Moretti's death as if it were merely a routine business transaction requiring disposal of an asset. You let him escape. Antonio finally spoke, his voice low and steady, ringing with the terrifying finality of a guillotine blade dropping. You let an empire worth billions of dollars slip through your grasp. All you had to do was keep him happy, keep him controlled until the plan was executed. Something that simple, and you could not even manage that. Victoria whirled around, her eyes blazing with a self-destructive fury. Do not blame me. Someone betrayed us. Someone told him the truth. I did everything exactly according to plan. Everything. Antonio moved closer, each deliberate step slow, measured, and full of concentrated menace. The plan did not include Dominic Moretti and his 2 children vanishing into thin air in the middle of the night. The plan did not include us losing the most important leverage we needed to take over Chicago. Victoria stepped back slightly, but her eyes showed no submission, only defiant madness. I will find him. Marco and Vincent have already captured Tony Russo, one of Dominic's old subordinates. He knows some of the places where Dominic might be hiding. A vicious, hungry smile spread across her lips, chilling in its intensity. And after they finish with Tony, I will have answers. Antonio looked at his daughter for a long, agonizing moment, then gave a curt, almost invisible nod. Find him, he commanded. And this time, do not let him escape again. I will find him, Victoria replied, her voice instantly becoming cold, focused, and terrifyingly clear. And I will kill him. I will kill both of his brat children, too. No one is allowed to humiliate Victoria Santoro and live to tell the tale. In the damp basement of an abandoned warehouse on the south side of Chicago, Tony Russo was screaming, his cries echoing weakly off the concrete walls. Marco and Vincent had been working on him relentlessly for the past 12 hours. And finally, amid blood and uncontrollable tears, he had remembered a small, seemingly insignificant detail. Milwaukee. He had once overheard Dominic mention a secondary safe house in Milwaukee, prepared years ago for only the most severe emergencies. He did not know the exact street address, but he remembered the general area. The western suburbs, near a small, overlooked public park. That vague detail was terrifyingly more than enough for Victoria. In the Milwaukee safe house, Elena stood by the window, as she did every hour, her sharp eyes diligently scanning the quiet suburban street outside. It was a mechanical habit, a necessity that 3 months of working as an operative had drilled into her very bones. And that ingrained habit saved all of their lives. She noticed it immediately. A sedan parked at the very end of the street, its engine still running, unnaturally quiet. A shadowy figure moving too purposefully in the dense bushes across the way. A plumbing repair van parked too long at the intersection, even though there was no sign of construction work or maintenance activity in the area. Elena turned around, her face suddenly devoid of color. They found us, she said to Dominic, her voice strangely calm, stripped of all emotion, but utterly certain. At least 3 surveillance points. They are waiting for something, possibly reinforcements. We have a few hours at most. Dominic did not ask how she was so certain. He trusted Elena completely and absolutely. He immediately called Marcus. They found us. We need to move now. Marcus swore savagely on the other end of the line, the sound crackling through the receiver. I will have people there in 30 minutes. Be ready to move on my mark. 30 minutes. Dominic looked at the clock. 30 minutes could stretch into an eternity. They began packing instantly, moving with a desperate, silent efficiency. Elena woke the children, dressed them quickly, and firmly instructed them to stay absolutely quiet. Lucas understood instantly, his eyes once again aging far beyond his 7 years. Sophia clung tightly to her brother's hand, asking no questions, only burying her face against his side. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Dominic stood behind the thick curtain, his body pressed against the wall, watching the street outside. Everything remained unsettlingly quiet. Perhaps they would make it in time. Perhaps Marcus would arrive before the Santoro strike force descended. Then headlights glared, shining directly into the house, momentarily blinding him. 3 black SUVs, large, menacing and identical, turned onto the street, their powerful engines roaring like predatory animals in the stillness of the night. They stopped directly in front of the house in a ruthless tactical formation, effectively blocking every potential escape route. The doors opened simultaneously, and dark figures poured out, weapons already locked and ready. And stepping down from the first vehicle, completely unhurried, was Victoria Santoro herself. She wore a sleek, form-fitting black dress, her hair pinned up elegantly, looking eerily as if she were dressed for a sophisticated cocktail party rather than for a mass execution. But the gun in her hand was no mere decoration, and her eyes, when she finally looked toward the house, blazed with the cold, final madness of someone who had deliberately crossed the boundary of sanity and knew she could never return. Dominic! Victoria's voice rang out in the night, sickeningly sweet and venomous. Come out, darling. We have something crucial to discuss. The front door burst open with a thunderous, splintering crash. Victoria stormed in like a violent tempest. The gun in her hand instantly aimed straight at Elena, and the children huddled desperately in the corner of the living room. Behind her, 2 heavily armed Santoro assassins flooded in, weapons ready, their eyes rapidly sweeping the room for any hidden threats. Victoria looked like the angel of death in her couture black dress, her eyes blazing with a madness Dominic had never once glimpsed in all their years together. Do not move, Victoria screamed, her gun trained unwaveringly on Elena's head. Anyone moves, I shoot. Elena stood immediately before the children, a fragile shield of flesh and bone. Her hands pushed Lucas and Sophia further behind her, covering them with her body, ready to take the impact. Lucas held his sister tightly, his eyes wide with pure terror, yet not a single tear fell. Sophia buried her face frantically in her brother's chest, her small sobs muffled by the fabric of his shirt. Dominic stepped out from the kitchen doorway, both hands raised high above his head, completely and deliberately unarmed. He had left the Beretta in the secret room in Chicago, and now he faced his deranged fiancée with nothing but his bare hands and his wits. He walked slowly, placing himself squarely between Victoria and those he desperately wanted to protect. Victoria, he said, his voice surprisingly calm and level given the apocalyptic circumstances. This is between you and me. Let them go. They have nothing to do with what is between us. Victoria laughed. But it was not the elegant, charming laugh Dominic had heard at glittering parties or the intimate sound from the nights they had lain beside each other. It was a shattered, hysterical laugh, the sound of someone standing precariously on the absolute edge of a cliff, no longer caring which direction she would fall. Between you and me, she repeated, her voice dripping with corrosive, bitter sarcasm. No, Dominic, this is not between you and me. This is between you and my family. Between you and everything you have taken from us. Between you and all the years my father spent building this plan. I took nothing from the Santoros, Dominic replied, his voice still steady, resisting the urge to shout. I only lived my life, built my empire. I never attacked your family. Victoria took another challenging step forward, the gun trembling slightly in her hand, but still focused like a laser beam on Dominic's chest. You took my future, she screamed, her voice cracking like stressed glass. I was born to become the Queen of Chicago. That was my destiny. That was the entire reason I exist. And you? She laughed bitterly, a sound full of self-pity. You were just a tool, a puppet my father intended to use to take over everything. But you could not even play that role properly. You did not even know how to love me the right way. Love you? Dominic asked, without a trace of wavering or fear. Do you even know what love is, Victoria? Or do you only know what possession is? Victoria pointed the gun straight at his face, the black muzzle looming large in the dim light. Do not lecture me about love. You love a woman who is dead. You love 2 children you never had the time for. Is that your love? Elena spoke up suddenly from behind Dominic. Her voice was strangely, disturbingly calm in the center of the storm. Victoria, the FBI is already on the way. Marcus Webb, the federal agent in charge of this case, raised the alarm 10 minutes before you arrived. They will be here in a few minutes. She paused, letting each word land with the weight of granite. You can kill us, but you will not escape. Not this time. Victoria swung the gun toward Elena, her eyes burning with an incandescent, pure hatred. You think I care? You think I am afraid of the FBI? You think I am afraid to die? She laughed, her manic laughter echoing shrilly through the small room. I am not afraid of anything. There is nothing left for me to lose. Dominic took another measured step toward Victoria, slowly, deliberately, without threat, his hands still raised. You are not afraid to die, he said, his voice dropping low, compelling her to listen. I know that. I can see it in your eyes. But there is something you are afraid of, Victoria. Something that has haunted you since you were just a child. Victoria instinctively stepped back. The gun was still pointed at Dominic, but it was no longer as steady as it had been moments ago. You know nothing about me. I know you fear failure. Dominic continued, each carefully chosen word like a scalpel cutting deeply into her soul. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of your father looking at you like you are worthless. The way he looked at you in the penthouse tonight. Am I right? When he blamed you for letting me escape. Victoria was visibly trembling now. The gun in her hand trembled along with her entire body. You did everything he asked, Dominic said, his voice softening slightly, becoming almost sympathetic. You pretended to love me. You tormented my children to turn them into manageable creatures. You planned to kill my entire family to inherit everything. All just so your father would look at you with pride just once in your life. He paused, looking straight into Victoria's wild, manic eyes. But he was never proud of you, was he? Never. No matter what you did, because to Antonio Santoro you were always just a tool. The same way you called me a tool. You have been terrified your entire life of being your father's puppet and dying without ever being seen as a real person. Tears began to roll unchecked down Victoria's cheeks, mixing instantly with her perfect, expensive makeup, leaving long, horrifying black streaks on her flawless skin. The gun in her hand lowered slightly, then rose again immediately, as if she were engaged in a violent internal struggle against herself. Be quiet, she whispered, her voice shattering. Be quiet. You do not understand anything. But Dominic knew he had struck the deepest, most vulnerable wound. And he also knew that, in the next few seconds, everything could pivot wildly in any direction. Victoria laughed bitterly, the sound breaking from her throat like a strangled sob. Do you think you understand me? You think a few cheap psychological observations are enough to see through my soul? She shook her head, tears still flowing freely, but the twisted smile still fixed on her lips. You understand nothing, Dominic. You do not understand 1% of what I have been through. Dominic stood still, neither retreating nor advancing, holding her gaze. Then let me understand, he said, his voice gentler now, laced with genuine curiosity. If I am about to die by your hand, at least grant me the clarity to understand why. Victoria looked at him for a long, heavy moment. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, yet still holding a spark of self-awareness that had not quite died. Then she lowered the gun slightly, not in true surrender, not in giving up, but with the profound exhaustion of someone who had carried too many terrible secrets for too long. "Catherine," she said, the name escaping her lips like a final, chilling sigh. Dominic froze instantly. His wife's name rang through the small room like a death knell in the silence. He knew, with the primal instinct of someone who had lived too long in the darkness, that what Victoria was about to reveal would change everything he believed about his past. "Your wife," Victoria continued, her voice becoming unervingly calm, measured, and matter-of-fact. "Catherine Moretti, the woman you loved more than anything in this world. The woman you looked at with eyes you never once gave to me. Do not speak of her," Dominic said, his voice taut and dangerous as a coiled wire. "You need to hear this." Victoria drew a deep, ragged breath, as if preparing herself for a suicidal leap into the abyss. "Catherine's death was not a car accident, Dominic. It was never an accident." The world stopped spinning for Dominic. He felt as if someone had just physically sucked all the air from his lungs, leaving him gasping for reality. "What did you say?" "My father arranged everything," Victoria said, each word clear, slow, and devastating, as if reading his death sentence aloud. "The brakes were cut. A dangerous curve, bad weather, all calculated perfectly to look like a tragic mistake. A tragic accident that no one would ever suspect. A poor widow leaving behind 2 small children and a shattered husband." Dominic instinctively stepped back, his legs seeming to lose all their strength beneath him. Catherine, his beloved wife. Not an accident. Murdered. Killed by the Santoro family while he wept blindly beside her coffin, never knowing the true depth of the deception. "Why?" he asked, his voice now only a whispered current of pure, agonizing pain. "Why did he do it?" Victoria looked at him directly, and in her eyes, Dominic saw a flicker of something that resembled genuine pity. "Because she wanted you out of this life. Because she was the only effective barrier preventing my father from absorbing your empire. Catherine wanted you to sell everything, move to Montana, live a normal life away from the darkness. She almost convinced you." Victoria laughed bitterly, a broken sound. "My father could not let that happen. You were too valuable, your empire too rich, so he simply eliminated the obstacle." Dominic felt his stomach violently revolt. Catherine had died because she loved him, because she wanted to save him from the darkness. And he had failed to protect her, not from fate, but from a calculated, vicious enemy. "And I," Victoria continued, her voice catching painfully in her throat, "I was designed to replace her from beginning to end. I was just a chess piece in my father's disgusting game. A reward for you in exchange for your obedience. A beautiful puppet engineered to keep you happy, while my father slowly, silently swallowed everything you had built." "You knew from the beginning?" Dominic asked, his voice shaking violently from the immense effort required to contain the primal rage burning inside. Victoria shook her head, emphatically denying it. And for the first time, Dominic saw her truly cry. Not calculated tears meant to manipulate, not a staged performance to achieve a goal. These were the pure, desperate tears of a shattered soul flowing beyond any control. "I found out after I had already fallen in love with you," she said, her voice cracking completely. "After I had given you real feelings. My father told me as a lesson, a gruesome reminder of my permanent place in his grand, terrible plan. And I was too deep to ever turn back." She looked at Dominic, her eyes bloodshot and desperate. "I hate you, Dominic. I hate you because you never looked at me the way you looked at her. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried. In your eyes, I was always just Catherine's ghost. A cheap imitation, a replacement that was never, ever good enough." Victoria turned to look at Lucas and Sophia huddled terrified behind Elena, her eyes now full of genuine anguish, not malice. "I hate your children. I hate them because they are living proof of the love you gave to someone else. Every time I looked at them, I saw Catherine. I saw everything I could never have. I saw everything that was stolen from me before I even had a chance to fight for it." She lowered the gun completely, her arm hanging limp and heavy at her side as if all strength had suddenly drained away from her body. And most of all, I hate myself. I hate that I became this monster. I hate that I hurt innocent children. I hate that I let my father turn me into a killing tool. I hate that even knowing all of this, I kept doing it. Tears streamed down Victoria's face, mixing heavily with her mascara into thick, black smears across features that had once been the epitome of perfection. She looked like a painting melting away under the heat of a raging fire, a work of high art being willfully destroyed from within. "Do you understand now?" she asked, her voice now only a ragged whisper. "You are not the only victim here, Dominic. I am a victim, too, of my father, of fate, of choices I never truly had the freedom to make." Sirens tore through the Milwaukee night, the high, urgent wail shattering the fragile silence. Blue and red lights flickered violently through the window curtains, reflecting on the walls like ghostly, racing streaks of blood. The FBI had arrived, exactly as Elena had predicted, exactly as Marcus had promised. Outside, the harsh sound of cars braking hard, doors slamming shut, and the measured rhythm of tactical feet running on pavement filled the air. The two Santoro assassins looked at each other in immediate, uncontrolled panic, then turned and fled out the back door like rats seeking escape from a rapidly sinking ship. Victoria stood completely motionless in the middle of the living room, the gun still hanging loosely in her hand, pointed uselessly at the floor. She looked toward the window, looked at the FBI vehicles aggressively surrounding the house, looked at the figures in Kevlar vests moving precisely into tactical position. Then she turned back one last time to look at Dominic, her eyes still swollen from crying, but still holding a fierce, final spark that had not quite died. "I could end you right now," she said, her voice frighteningly calm again. "Before they come in, at least I could take that from him. Least I would complete part of the plan." Dominic held her gaze, his stance unwavering, betraying no flicker of the terror that should have been present. "You certainly could," he conceded, his voice low and even. "But you will not," Victoria countered, a painful, self-mocking smile pulling at the corner of her mouth as she tilted her head. "How can you be so certain? Do you truly believe you grasp my intent so completely after the depths of everything I just revealed?" "Because you are tired," Dominic stated simply, his voice dropping into a tone of gentle, profound understanding, as if soothing a deeply injured, lost child. "Tired of carrying this weight. Tired of the corrosive hatred that fuels you. Tired of being a puppet tied to your father's strings. Tired of spending every single day fabricating a facade of composure while you are silently disintegrating within." He stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. "You have been running your entire life, Victoria. Running to chase your father's approval. Running to desperately validate your own worth. Running to escape the simple, terrible truth that you have never, not once, been allowed to live a life of your own choosing." Tears streamed relentlessly down Victoria's face again, etching clean paths through the grime and smeared makeup, but this time she made no effort to hide them. "You think simply laying down this gun will alter anything significant? I will still be arrested, still face prison, still rot there until the day I die." Dominic took a final, slow, deliberate step forward, projecting an air of complete harmlessness, his proximity now intimate. "Put down the weapon, Victoria. Not for me. Not for the FBI agents swarming outside this building, but solely for yourself." He paused, now only an arm's length away. "Let this moment be the last time you are a mere instrument in someone else's agenda. The last time anyone dictates your actions. Let this ultimate decision be profoundly and exclusively yours." A heavy silence descended, a palpable density of unresolved tension that seemed sharp enough to slice through. Outside, a muffled voice booming through a megaphone reiterated the demand for surrender. Blue and red emergency lights continued their relentless, frantic pulsing, throwing erratic, dancing shadows across the walls of the room. Behind Dominic, Elena remained utterly still, her body rigid, forming a desperate shield around the children. She did not dare to breathe too loudly, afraid the slightest sound would shatter the fragile stalemate. Victoria's eyes tracked down to the heavy weapon in her hand, then lifted to meet Dominic's unwavering gaze, flickered toward Elena and the children huddled in the corner, and finally fixed upon the window, the framed portal to the old life that waited outside to be terminated. The gun clattered loudly onto the wooden floor. Victoria's legs immediately buckled beneath her. She collapsed to her knees, her head bowed low, her entire frame convulsing with violent, shuddering waves of grief. Her crying ripped through the quiet room, no longer muffled, no longer contained, no longer controlled. This was the sound of a woman who had finally and utterly ceased running. The raw, guttural cry of a fractured soul that had fought far too long and possessed no remaining strength to continue the battle. The front door exploded inward. FBI agents flooded the room like a sudden, overwhelming tide. Weapons instantly raised and trained, powerful flashlights sweeping across every surface. Marcus Webb was at the front, his eyes performing a rapid, professional assessment. Victoria kneeling, weeping on the floor. Dominic standing nearby, unharmed. Elena and the children securely safe in the corner. Situation is secure. Control is established, Marcus barked, lowering his own weapon. Two agents moved swiftly toward Victoria, handling her gently yet firmly, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists and assisting her back to her feet. Marcus stepped beside Dominic, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible register. Antonio Santoro was apprehended 20 minutes ago in Chicago. Along with him, 17 high-ranking members of the family hierarchy were taken into custody. The entire Santoro organization disintegrated in one single night. Dominic simply gave a tight nod, offering no verbal response. His attention remained fixed on Victoria as she was carefully escorted toward the doorway. She stopped and turned back for a final look. Her eyes were puffy and swollen from the intense crying. Mascara streaked dramatically across her face. There was nothing left of the cold, prideful Victoria Santoro he had once known. Only a profoundly broken woman, another tragic casualty of Antonio Santoro's insidious control, even though she herself had inflicted immeasurable pain. "I am so sorry," Victoria managed to whisper, her voice thin and raspy, encompassing Catherine, encompassing everything. Then she was guided away, vanishing into the churning night punctuated by the relentless flashes of blue and red police lights. Dominic stood rooted to the spot, the churning emotions within him a tight, impossible knot. Hatred for the suffering she had inflicted on his children. Deep anguish over the full, agonizing truth about Catherine. But also, a small, stubborn fragment of profound pity for another shattered soul consumed by Antonio Santoro's raging storm. 6 months later, autumn had draped the streets of Madison, Wisconsin, in brilliant, burnished gold. Maple leaves drifted lazily down onto neat sidewalks, and the wind carried the first crisp, refreshing chill of the season through the long rows of trees changing their brilliant colors. At 847 Maple Drive, a modest, unpretentious two-story house anchored by a friendly white picket fence and a small, flourishing flower garden, life unfolded with a meticulous, almost tedious normalcy. This quiet, predictable existence was precisely what the inhabitants of the house craved above all else. Thomas Reynolds stood before his 10th grade English class at Madison West High School, holding a well-thumbed copy of The Great Gatsby in his hand, his gaze resting warmly upon the attentive, youthful faces of his students. He wore a soft, light blue button-down shirt tucked neatly into conservative slacks and a pair of thick, black-framed glasses, standard issue for his new identity courtesy of the Witness Protection Program. No one observing this gentle, thoughtful middle-aged man, with his slightly receding hairline and patient demeanor, could ever conceive that he had once been Dominic Moretti, the feared and notorious crime boss of the Chicago underworld. Fitzgerald understood that fundamentally, we are all boats against the current. Thomas told his students, his voice calm, measured, and intellectually engaging. We are relentlessly borne back into the past. No matter how fiercely we struggle, the past remains, a powerful undertow always pulling us backward. He paused, looking toward the window where golden leaves danced on the breeze. In that instant, he was no longer merely a literature teacher, but a man intimately confronting the long, enduring shadows of his own former life. But that realization doesn't mandate that we cease rowing. We must continue to propel ourselves forward. Always. Even when the current resists with all its force, because the sheer effort, the daily, persistent struggle to become a better version of ourselves, that is the core of what makes us truly human. The class bell rang, a sharp, metallic sound breaking the spell. Students gathered their books and slung backpacks over their shoulders. A few lingered near the desk, nervously asking questions about the upcoming assignments. Thomas addressed each inquiry with a patient and genuine warmth that the ruthless Dominic Moretti had never remotely possessed. When the classroom finally emptied, he remained seated alone for several contemplative minutes, gazing out at the vacant desks, wondering quietly whether this peaceful, unassuming life was the precise dream Catherine had once held for him. He drove his old, reliable Toyota Camry home through the peaceful, quiet streets of Madison. Neighbors waved cheerful greetings to one another, and small children rode bicycles freely along the sidewalks. A stark, almost unbelievable contrast to Chicago, with its menacing dark alleys and pervasive, watchful eyes. Here, people walked without the instinctive need to glance anxiously over their shoulders. Here, the clear, bright sound of children's laughter was not swallowed up by the abrasive wail of sirens and the distant, echoing rattle of gunfire. When Thomas unlocked his door and stepped inside, the comforting scent of a home-cooked meal immediately enveloped him. Sarah Reynolds was sitting at the oak kitchen table, her hair loosely secured in a casual messy bun, reading glasses slightly askew on her nose as she diligently graded a mountainous stack of elementary school tests. She looked up when the door closed and greeted him with a completely natural, relaxed smile. One of my second graders wrote in her essay that her mother can fly because she is actually a witch, Sarah said, her voice a balanced mix of professional exasperation and genuine amusement. I honestly have no idea what grade to assign that level of imagination. Thomas laughed, a deep, easy sound, and leaned down to place a tender kiss on her forehead. Give her an A. High marks for pure, unfettered creativity. In the living room, Michael sat cross-legged on the rug, intensely focused on his math homework. His face held a familiar expression of deep concentration, precisely mirroring the serious look Thomas often wore when grappling with a complex problem. The boy was 8 years old now, slightly taller and noticeably leaner than he had been 6 months earlier, and his eyes no longer held that terrifyingly prematurely old gaze. When Sarah walked past and gently teased him about a misplaced number, Michael let out a clear, ringing giggle, the sound chiming through the room like delicate wind chimes. Emma sat beside her brother, not burdened by homework, but engrossed in drawing with her new, vibrant box of crayons. Thomas stepped closer and looked over his daughter's shoulder at the scene she was painstakingly creating. Her figures stood hand in front of a colorful house, all smiling brightly beneath a huge, benevolent golden sun. A father, a mother, a brother, and Emma herself, a family unit. Who is this lovely princess? Thomas inquired gently, although he knew the answer immediately. It's us, Emma declared proudly, holding the drawing up for full inspection. The Reynolds family. I made the sun really, really big because our house always has sunshine. That evening, they gathered around the heavy oak kitchen table for dinner, spaghetti covered in Sarah's homemade tomato sauce. It was not the flawlessly prepared cuisine served by a private chef in the cold, opulent Chicago penthouse, but it tasted better than any meal Dominic Moretti had ever eaten. Their conversation revolved around school schedules, homework assignments, Emma's new gym teacher, and Michael's latest friend on the soccer team. Ordinary conversations, to the point of being utterly mundane. Ordinary in a way that felt completely miraculous. After dinner, Thomas read to the children before they settled into bed. It was Harry Potter, Volume 3, Chapter 12. Michael had listened to this story numerous times, but he still adored the sound of his father's calming voice. Emma curled up next to him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet battling hard to stay awake until the very end of the chapter. But the scars, Thomas knew, were still deep. They did not vanish simply because of a change of address and a new name. Michael still suffered from nightmares sometimes. On those nights when he would scream in his sleep, calling out his sister's name, or begging someone to stop, Thomas would rush into the room, hold his trembling son tight, and whisper soothingly that everything was truly over, that he was safe now, until the boy's breathing evened out again. Emma still flinched violently at any loud, sudden noise. A door slamming unexpectedly, or a nearby dog barking sharply, could freeze her in a state of terror for a few seconds before she finally registered that she was no longer in Chicago. Sarah still compulsively checked the door locks 3 times before going to bed every night. She still scanned over her shoulder when walking down the quiet street. She still carried a small, sharp knife concealed deep in her purse, despite the fact that Madison was renowned as one of the safest cities in America. And Thomas still woke up in the dark, drenched in icy sweat, at exactly 3 a.m. He still heard Catherine's distant, echoing call in his dreams. He still saw Sophia kneeling on that blood-stained carpet, labeling herself useless every time he closed his eyes. But they were actively healing, slowly, painstakingly, day by day. Every shared breakfast was a small, quiet victory. Every laugh that rang from the children was a definite step forward. Every night they slept securely within the walls of their little house on Maple Drive served as a powerful reminder that the past did not hold the sole power to define their future. The autumn night settled over Maple Drive in profound, perfect stillness. The last remnants of the season's golden leaves drifted gently onto the sidewalks, and the soft lights from the surrounding homes gradually winked out as the neighborhood surrendered to sleep. Thomas and Sarah sat together on the front porch swing, 2 steaming cups of hot tea in their hands, their shoulders touching instinctively against the early seasonal chill. The children were sleeping soundly inside, the deep, peaceful sleep of children who had finally found sanctuary. Sarah looked out at the empty, silent street, her voice a soft thread gently breaking the quiet. Do you ever genuinely miss it? The absolute power, the automatic respect, that undeniable feeling of knowing exactly who you were and precisely where you belonged? Thomas did not reply instantly. He looked upward at the massive expanse of the night sky, where the cold, distant stars flickered, something he had never once had the time or inclination to notice when he was Dominic Moretti. Sometimes, he finally admitted the word a heavy exhalation. Sometimes I wake up and I forget where I am, forget the man I am now. And for a few seconds, I remember the feeling of walking into a room and watching every conversation instantly cease. I remember that intoxicating feeling of absolute, unquestioned power. He turned his head to look directly at Sarah, and his eyes softened profoundly. Then I remember that the man who commanded that power is the same man who got Catherine killed. I remember that because of that life, my son had to learn how to be utterly silent just to survive. And my daughter was forced to kneel and call herself useless. He drew a deep, cleansing breath, his gaze fixed on the woman who had painstakingly given him this unparalleled second chance. This life is superior, Sarah, he insisted, the new name, Thomas, rolling off his tongue with a settled warmth that made it feel utterly real. This quiet, this pervasive normalcy, being able to simply watch our children laugh without reservation every day. Coming home knowing that no one is lurking, waiting to harm my family. That is a luxury Dominic Moretti could never buy. Sarah took his hand, their fingers intertwining effortlessly, as if they had been designed perfectly for one another. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, listening only to the faint rustling of the wind through the remaining leaves and the persistent, distant chirp of crickets in the garden. Then Thomas reached into his slacks pocket and slowly pulled out a small, worn black velvet box. Sarah looked down at the box, then back up at him, her eyes widening in stunned surprise. I never asked you properly, Thomas said, his voice earnest as he opened the box. Inside rested a simple, unadorned silver band. There were no diamonds, no display of wealth, just a plain, elegant ring with a single word engraved on the inside. Together. We got married initially for cover, because the witness protection program mandated we needed to present as a legitimate family. But that is not why I want to be with you anymore. He turned fully toward her, carefully holding both of her hands in his. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a vulnerable whisper that the cool night wind could not possibly carry to the neighbors. Elena Carter, he murmured, speaking the name like a secret, sacred prayer. Or Sarah Reynolds. The name on the paper holds no meaning. I love the woman underneath. He swallowed hard. Will you marry me? Truly marry me? Not for the protection, but because I love you. Because I cannot, truly cannot, imagine a future in this life without you beside me. Because you saved me, you saved my children, and you gave me the chance to begin again. Tears immediately flooded Sarah's eyes. She could not speak, but merely nodded violently, then nodded again, as if terrified he might misunderstand the depth of her affirmation. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. A kiss salty with her tears and sweet with overwhelming happiness. That night, lying side by side in the small, unassuming bedroom of their modest home on Maple Drive, Thomas contemplated the long, circuitous journey that had finally brought him here. From the head of a criminal empire to a 10th grade literature teacher, from a lavish penthouse to an ordinary two-story house, from Dominic Moretti to Thomas Reynolds, from profound violence to hard-won peace, from utter collapse to slow, steady healing. He reached for the locket resting on the nightstand, the sole physical object from his old life he had chosen to retain. Inside, where only Catherine's photograph had once resided, there were now 3 pictures. Catherine on the left, her gentle, unwavering smile forever frozen in time. Dominic in the center, an old, serious photograph taken before everything had irrevocably shattered. And Elena on the right, the steady, determined gaze of the woman who had given him the ultimate reason to keep living. The past, the present, and the future, 3 essential pieces of one life. Some scars never completely fade, he whispered softly into the darkness, his fingers lightly brushing the cold surface of the locket. But in the right hands, they cease being marks of injury and become proof of survival. And survival, Thomas had finally learned, is simply another way of speaking about love. Outside the window, Madison slept peacefully beneath the quiet autumn sky. The stars still shimmered above, indifferent to the personal tragedies and quiet triumphs of the people below. And inside the small house on Maple Drive, a family meticulously built from profound brokenness dreamed of the future. A future where the past was reduced to a distant, harmless shadow, no longer an immediate threat. A future where the children once labeled useless would grow up knowing they were unconditionally, fiercely loved. A future where love, even when it arrived late and after immeasurable pain, still retained the miraculous power to bloom. Some scars never fade. But in the right hands, they become proof of survival. And survival, Dominic had learned, is simply another way of speaking about love. The story of the Reynolds family on Maple Drive is a crucial reminder that it is never truly too late to initiate change. That the past, regardless of its darkness, does not possess the inherent power to define the future you choose to build. That love can and will take root and grow in the most unexpected, unlikely places. And that sometimes, losing absolutely everything is the precise mechanism by which we finally discover what truly matters. The greatest, most enduring lesson this narrative offers is the profound value of family and the transformative power of personal choice. Dominic once commanded everything: power, immense wealth, unquestioned respect. Yet, he came perilously close to losing what was most precious simply because he failed to be physically present when his children desperately needed him. A busy, distracted life can sometimes trick us into forgetting that the people we love require our undivided presence more than anything else we can provide. Make the dedicated time for your family. Listen sincerely to your children. And always remember that no external success is ever worth the price if, along the way, we lose the ones we cherish most. If this deep and intricate story has resonated with your heart, if you see yourself or someone you hold dear reflected in these characters' journeys, please consider subscribing to our channel and activating the notification bell so you won't miss the next emotional stories we release. Please remember to like and share this video with the people you love, because sometimes a single story possesses the power to fundamentally change the way we view life itself. Leave a comment below so that we can talk, share, and truly connect with one another through these shared life stories. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with us today. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful and fulfilling life, and enduring daily peace of mind. Always cherish the people standing right beside you, for they are the greatest, most irreplaceable treasure you will ever possess. Goodbye for now, and we sincerely look forward to seeing you again in the next video.